One day I hope people put my Twilight Princess Let's Play in a museum for being the longest running Let's Play in YouTube history. But until that day comes, let's talk about my first and one of the best Zelda games. It is often said that the start of Twilight Princess is too slow, that it takes forever to hit the first dungeon, and that it's so derivative of Ocarina of Time. And I hear those arguments. I also don't really care. You see, Twilight Princess is a game I look at as an epic, a game that is entrenched in fantasy influences like The Lord of the Rings. Take one look at the Goron Mines boss and tell me that isn't just a Balrog. With that lens applied, Twilight Princess makes more sense. It's a grand, sweeping game that takes the blueprint of Ocarina of Time and improves on so much. The dungeons are larger and more complex. The companion character in Midna is a marked improvement and still one of the best characters in Zelda history. But importantly for me, it was also more accessible. Being a launch game for the Wii meant that it had its fair share of waggle, but it also gave us pointer controls, which made bow and arrow combat, especially while on horseback, so much easier. It was brimming with new ideas, and though many of those were forgotten and hardly used again after their dungeons, I wish newer Zelda games would be as bold as Twilight Princess. The spinner is still one of the most unique contraptions in any video game, and the ball and chain completely changes combat. Ultimately, the dungeons are fantastic, with Arbiter's Grounds and the Snow Peak Mansion being particular standouts. These weren't just themed temples, they were places with context and history, and I think that's why they were so memorable. Nostalgia plays a big part in my love for this game, but it still holds up as one of the best. The first time I played Super Mario Land 2 The 6 Golden Coins was on my cousin's Game Boy. I don't think I had ever played a Mario game before, so this was my introduction to the portly plumber. And I fell in love instantly. Music is one of the strongest nostalgia triggers out there, and the soundtrack to this game takes me back every time I hear it. I love how big and chunky Mario looks, and that power-ups give him rabbit ears or a feather in his cap. The theming is amazing with all the different zones, including my favourite, the Mario Zone, where you go inside a clockwork Mario working your way to the top. I love the enemy designs and how non-Mario they are. You have these weird cows that are fish, or even the worker ants that throw balls of manure at you, or even the enemy that I misidentified as walking strawberries for a decade that are actually terrifying hockey mask creatures with knives stuck in their heads. The best thing about Mario Land 2 though is that it's actually pretty easy compared to other games in the series, meaning it was a perfect jumping on point for someone like me. Though I only beat it years later on 3DS, it still holds up as a game I can jump into whenever I want and have a good time. Xenoblade Chronicles X, a game that is so incredibly flawed and yet so incredible at the same time. I'll tell you now, there are things Xenoblade Chronicles X does that are better than any video game I've ever played. When I was younger and had just been introduced to open world games like GTA 3, something that was so wondrous to me was the ability to just fly across the entire enormous space in a plane or a helicopter. I think that freedom to move through the open air was why Spider-Man 2 on GameCube was also such a thrill. But no game has come close to flying your Skell across the 5 continents of Xenoblade Chronicles X. The feeling is simply amazing. And it works because you have to build up to it. Monolith Soft create amazing environments, but I don't think they have yet bested the tiered exploration of Xenoblade X, where you start as a tiny human in awe of the enormity of your environment, then get your first Skell allowing you to reach new areas while also traversing the world much faster, then finally being able to fly yourself anywhere as if it was nothing, achieving true mastery of the space. Exploration is the strong suit of this game, and I got obsessed with the hexagonal grid on the gamepad, mining endless money for myself through the node system. I could complain about the unfinished story, the tiny text, the confusing battle system and all of that, but this is a list about celebrating games, and despite all its flaws, Xenoblade Chronicles X is still breathtaking. My dad bought me a PlayStation for Christmas of 1999, my first home console. I loved it and played a bunch of games that first day, like Mission Impossible and Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, but I never really got anywhere in them. It wasn't until Spyro the Dragon that I really invested in a PlayStation game. Here was an accessible platformer with bright colours of the Nintendo games that my friends had. I played so much Spyro that sounds like the na-na-na-na-na of the Egg Thief are permanently burned into my brain thanks to hours and hours of chasing him. I didn't quite realise how much Spyro I played or how far I had gotten until I picked up the Reignited trilogy last year and it all came rushing back. Out of the two PlayStation mascots, Crash was always more popular, but I always thought Spyro was the better video game, and I think a lot more people would agree with that these days. This really was an exploration platformer, and it still holds up in 2019. The first two worlds especially I know back to front, so it was such a unique joy to revisit them. I loved it so much that I platinumed the first game in the trilogy, which is the first time I've platinumed anything. That tells you all you need to know about how much I love this game. One of the most popular and revered games of the last decade, Skyrim is a name that is more recognizable than the franchise it comes from. Ask 10 people on the street if they know what the Elder Scrolls is, and I doubt any could tell you. Skyrim, however, broke through in a way that was pretty amazing. I've never been a fan of Bethesda's games. They are the polar opposite to Nintendo, focusing on deep narratives, big character-filled worlds, realistic art styles, and more often than not, are buggy and broken as hell. Skyrim, however, is the one exception for me, and despite the fact that I could play the best version possible on PC, I bought Skyrim on Switch. Portability with a world that large is amazing, and I have to say, in 50 plus hours of play, I've hit maybe 2 minor bugs. All credit to Iron Galaxy for a truly excellent port of the game. Everyone knows what Skyrim is, so I'll tell you about a moment that made me fall in love with the game. I made my way to the distant town of Solitude, and was greeted by the Winking Skeever Inn. The place instantly had a distinct atmosphere with low lighting and people in conversation drinking. Then some music started to play. There was a bard with her lute who had started a song, and so I sat down and listened.
We're the children of Skyrim and we fight all our lives, and when Sovngarde beckons, every one of us dies. But this land is ours and we'll see it wiped clean of the scourge that has sullied our hopes and our dreams.
I know it's silly to say, but in that moment, I felt like this world really existed, that I was really in that tavern, enjoying an evening drink while admiring a wonderful musical performance. Skyrim does this stuff better than any game I've played. It immerses you so thoroughly, right down to the fact that you can have a physical book collection in your house that you can browse and individually pick each one off the shelf. Even better, the books all look handwritten and aren't just text on a screen. Context for the world is everything in Skyrim, and it delivers that promise expertly. Dragon Quest VII is the third and final Dragon Quest game on my list. This is a game that is often maligned and thought of as a black sheep in the series. The original PlayStation game was by far the longest Dragon Quest, with playthroughs coming in at a minimum of 100 hours. I, however, played the 3DS remake, which is a tremendous update of the game that not only shortens it with faster paced fights, but updates the visuals and makes the game look stunning in 3D. I think the thing I love so much about Dragon Quest VII is that it's often unexpected. There's a character shift that happens about 20 hours in that I didn't see coming and changes the dynamic of the group. Each island that you repopulate the world with feels like its own micro-adventure, where you get a complete story, be it a town of people turned to animals, or an island with a mystery surrounding an autonomous robot. Each little narrative is interesting and unique. And all the dialogue is written with different British dialects that gave each settlement an identity of its own. The class system is probably one of my favourites, as it requires you to master a bunch of different classes to advance to the ultimate ones. My desire to unlock all of them meant that I never felt like I was grinding, but rather aiming for a goal. The 3DS remake also balances the difficulty, making it far more accessible, and overall is just such a very wholesome adventure. My friend Ali T is a huge fan of Ratchet & Clank. While I had a GameCube, he had a PS2, and so I would often be exposed to series like Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank at his house. Therefore, when Insomniac said it was going to remake the original game for the PS4, my interest was piqued. Not only is this one of the best looking PS4 games, it's straight up one of the best looking games I've ever played. The original art style translates perfectly while allowing the remake to also do its own thing. The various planets you go to have such diverse environments that just pop with lush colours, and the enemy animations are so detailed that I sometimes thought I was playing a 60 frames per second game when it is actually 30. The standout thing about Ratchet & Clank though is the weapons, and the way in which you need to manage ammo between them. This is a game that gives you so many fun things to play with, but also forces you to use them all. It's not like most games where you find a thing that works and ignore everything else. Ratchet & Clank gives you limitations to your tools, so you are forced out your comfort zone. As a result, you discover all the weird and wacky weapons in your arsenal, like the Groovatron that shoots out a disco ball, forcing all the enemies to dance. This is a game that nails the simple things, like the feeling of smashing boxes and collecting bolts. It's a video game ass video game, and so much fun. One of the defining aspects of many of my favourite games is a good physics engine. Creativity with physics and finding makeshift solutions to problems is one of the coolest things about where we are today with the interactive medium. Trine 2 may have been the first time I really played a game of this nature, and I still think about it to this day. It's a gorgeous 2D fairy tale themed platformer where you play as a wizard and a rogue and a knight, exploring, killing enemies and solving puzzles. On its face, it doesn't really stand out that much, but the fun is in switching between all three characters to jury-rig a solution that likely no one else has done in the exact same way, owing to the flexibility of the physics. This is one of those games that you should either play on PC, or in my case Wii U, which was a surprisingly good version as the touchscreen allows you to draw out boxes and planks as the wizard and manipulate exactly where they went. It is a lengthy adventure, and so much fun the whole way through as you unlock new skills and abilities for each member of the party. It's also a fantastic co-op game, where 3 friends can each play one character, but still stands very strong if you play alone. The experience of playing Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus is akin to strapping yourself to the front of a bullet train for 10 hours. This is the most fun I've ever had playing a single-player first-person shooter. I tend to enjoy more multiplayer-focused shooters like Overwatch, Titanfall, and Apex Legends, so it's rare for me to connect with a solo adventure. But I think so much of my enjoyment comes from being an unstoppable Nazi-killing machine. I play these types of games on easy, and I'm there for the story. And boy, does this game have a story to tell. It has some of the most shockingly jaw-dropping moments I've ever seen in a game, and also builds such strong characters and relationships that you really invest in. Between missions, there's a hub area where everyone hangs out, and there are so many opportunities to hear conversations that flesh out the world and hint at things to come. The shotgun was my personal weapon of choice, and let me tell you a thing. Running down a train while dual-wielding shotguns is among the best power fantasy moments I've ever played. If you hate Nazis and love twisting narratives, you owe it to yourself to play this game.
Super hot, super hot, super hot, super hot.
Super hot. Super hot. Two words that you'll hear again and again. I had heard a ton about Superhot before I ever played it. I knew the concept of when you move, time moves, and I had seen a bunch of people playing it, but playing it for yourself is an altogether different experience. This game is really more of a puzzle game than it is a shooter, as you plan and execute what you're going to do next over many attempts until you finally nail down the perfect sequence. The best thing about Superhot is being able to shoot a guy, grab his gun out of midair, then shoot another guy, throw your gun at the third guy, grab the second guy's shotgun to twist around and blast a fourth guy off the roof. It's these crazy strings of Neo-like moves that delivers on the promise of a good Matrix game that we never got. Yes, I played Enter the Matrix, and no, it is not a good video game. The overarching narrative is also incredibly intriguing as you mash on your keyboard to type messages to other hackers who keep sending you levels for the game. It builds to a fourth wall breaking, mind-melting ending that will have you thinking about it for days. Superhot is one of those games that proves that new ideas aren't dead in the video game space, and not only creates something wholly unique, but crushes it on its first try.